Hi everyone and welcome to the video. What we're doing at the moment is that we've been really thinking about the GAT a lot recently, and so we've just put up two videos looking at some sample pieces for the two writing tasks. And on top of that, we've been speaking to students and staff around the state, and we've been delivering some presentations, and I've had some really interesting questions that have come up. And so I've sort of collated a few of them together, and I've taken some of them word for word from the way that students asked me, because they were indicative of a lot of things that students were asking. And so there's a couple of questions about writing task 1, a few more about writing task 2, and some general questions about how to go about the writing task. And so if you've got any further questions that come up after the end of this video that you think you'd still like to see answered, feel free to put them down there in the comments. We might even make a second one of these based on however many replies we get to that video, because we're here to help you out with getting ready for the GAT and making sure that you're ready to go for it in terms of being prepared and feeling confident, because that's what we want for you. We want you to be able to walk in the morning of that GAT feeling like, yep, I know what I'm going on about here, I know what I need to do, and I'm prepared and ready to do it. And so the first question that we get comes in relation to writing task 1. And it came after I gave the advice that you shouldn't refer directly to the material that's there, because it's often a hallmark of a lower scoring piece when people say things like, the material has a picture of this above that, or in the graph it says, or something like that. And so the student said, well, if we shouldn't refer to pictures and graphs directly, how would we discuss them without directly referring to them? And so the way that you need to do that is to think about what is being communicated through anything that's visual or anything that is data driven that's on that page, say a graph or a map or whatever it might be. And instead of just looking at it and writing down what you see, write down what is being communicated through it. And so what I mean by that is that if there is an image, don't just describe what's happening in the image, but rather process what that image is conveying, what ideas it's conveying, what message it's getting across, what it is communicating. And when you do that, you're going to be leading yourself to getting to the essence of what the material is really saying, and you're going to be communicating it in your own language. And that's what the task is all about, to be able to show your understanding at that deeper level. It's the same thing with things like graphs or with maps. Rather than just saying, oh, it looked like this, or this is what was happening in this part of the map, or this part of the graph said exactly this, instead think about what can be looked at in detail with a map or a graph, and the trends that you might see, or the areas of the world and what we know about those areas of the world if it's a map. And all of those things that come in that way, where we can look at it and think, okay, this is what I can get out of this material, and this is how I can put it all together. The second question: is there a preferred word count for either of the writing tasks? And this is a question that, as an experienced English teacher, I have received hundreds of times. And I want to say to you that I've very rarely in my career ever looked at an essay and started counting out the words or anything. And I know that that's a frustrating answer, because students say, well, how many words does it need to be? And you want to be given a direct answer rather than just being told, oh, if you've done the job. But really it is a case of, I can tell and I know, just like all of your assessors and all of your English teachers know, whether you've done the job comprehensively or not, or whether you're a little bit short on detail and content, and whether you need to be able to do more. And so with this, my advice is the fact that you are given half an hour on each of the writing tasks. So do your best with what you can in half an hour. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. The people who are marking them are aware that you've only written them on unseen material in half an hour, and so they're not expecting you to write a 7-page thesis. They also know that you haven't seen the material, so you're not going to be able to go in there with anything that you are used to writing or in the habit of writing. But at the same time, if you don't get to the end of the half an hour feeling like you have commented on in writing task 1 a large majority of the material, well, then you know that you've been wasting your time on some of the irrelevant stuff. Of course, when it comes down to it, if you look down at your page and you've wasted a little bit of time and you've written 3/4 of a handwritten page, and you know that there's 5 or 6 things that you haven't mentioned, well, then you're going to be pretty sure that you haven't done enough. Whereas if you feel like you've really mentioned everything that's on the page and you've processed it, you've linked it all together, you've put it into multiple paragraphs that cover all of the information, well, then you can be confident that that is enough. And so word count doesn't really come down to it. It's about your ability within the half hour to show a comprehensive understanding of all of the material. Say there are 11 pieces of material on the page there for writing task 1, and you know that you've covered 10 of them. Don't stress. It's not about a case of someone saying, well, this piece was perfect and really comprehensive and excellent, but I'm only going to give it a 5 because it forgot that one picture or something like that. But if it starts to mount up a little bit and we start to look at it and think, well, actually they didn't mention that and they haven't referred to that and they missed out on that and they didn't do that, well, then we're starting to think, well, this is actually inhibiting how far that piece can go. And so with that, if we did the GAT last year is the next question, does that come into consideration for this year? So a general question. And the easy answer to that is no. The GAT is used in the year that it is taken so that the rankings and all those things can be formed and predictions can be made about exam scores and whatnot for the students of that year. So if you did the GAT last year, whether you did brilliantly or whether you did poorly and you want to do better this year, last year's last year. It's gone. This year is what it's all about for this year. Nothing is going to carry over. Nothing is going to be there. Everything that you did last year correlated to all of the exams that were sat in that year. And so everything that you do this year correlates to this one. There's no cumulative effect or anything that comes together with either of those scores. These next few questions were about writing task 2. Are we able to write this task in the first person? Yes, you are. There's nothing that is said about writing task 2 that dictates the way or the perspective from which you should write. Some people write best when they are writing from their own personal perspective and using I statements. Some people write better when they take a step back and they write subjectively about what's happening in the world and how these things exist. Choose the one that works well for you. Go ahead with the one that is going to allow you to be expressive and really working at your best. But there is no rule about which one that has to be. Can we bring in an understanding of politics or anything like that to support our contention with writing task 2? Most definitely. You are allowed and you are encouraged to bring in your understanding of the world. After all, you're responding to what is usually just 4 one-sentence statements. So you have to be able to bring in other information in order to flesh out the piece. And so if you can think of something that exists about the world, if you can think about something that you understand of the world, be that something that's happening in your neighborhood or be that something that's happening across the world, then bring it in and use it and show your understanding of that and how it helps you illustrate your point and your point of view. However, make sure that you don't get lost with a favorite subject or hobby or something like that that you're using to try to illustrate a point and veer off into just solely writing about that. Remember that with writing task 2, you've got to respond to the statements, but the vehicle through which you convey those statements in how you feel about them and getting your point of view across is completely up to you. A good mix that I've seen that works quite well and that I've done in my sample piece for writing task 2, which we'll link up to at the moment, up there, is that mix of both. Being able to talk about the personal and how these ideas and so on impact you, but then also being able to talk about the impact and the implications that these ideas have on the rest of the world. Being able to have that mix of real world knowledge and a personal perspective can be a way of doing it. Like I'm saying, it's not the way, it's just a way that I think can work well for a lot of students. And that might be something that you want to experiment with as you're looking to prepare yourself for the GAT writing tasks. So students then ask, are anecdotes effective and recommended? So like I just said there, when it came to writing task 2, I would say that in some cases they can work really well. Of course, just like with bringing in outside knowledge and things about ideology or history or politics or whatever it might be, if you're only going to talk about anecdotes, well then there's the danger that you could run into that it's just going to be a very narrow piece and a cornered piece because it's only about your experience. And sometimes the concepts that these statements bring up are quite broad and quite big and quite global. And so if you're only talking about how you in your little corner of the world feel about it, well then maybe you're not branching out far enough. So again, find that balance. And so they were just a few questions that seem to come up time and time again as I've been speaking to students across the state about how to go about these writing tasks. I've put them all forward here today so that perhaps if there's something that is bothering you or something that you wanted clarification on, it might help you on your journey in getting a little bit more confident about how to go about this task. If you have any further questions, you can put them down there in the comments and I will get to them. As I said earlier, we might create a second video if there's enough students that want enough help with the rest of these things. Until we see you next time, make sure you subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with all of our future videos. Throw a like to the video if you've really enjoyed it to help support us a little bit further, and all the best for the rest of your year.